There you go. As I was uploading, the moon began to rise. It's hazy. It's one of those nights where I thought I'd tell all you young people a bedtime story. And it's about me, mom, and dad. Um, my parents were Stoics. Uh, Unlike my father, I'm a bit more like my mother in a chatterbox in the communication department. My father, as I've told before, really never commented on race, religion, or politics. I told you his one political statement. Look, son, they make you pay for it. Even to pay. He was showing his poll tax receipt. It's been illegal for a long time now. And he goes, look, son. This was in the Kennedy Nixon election. Look, son, they even make you pay to vote. I think it was down to. I think they'd reduced it down to 250. It had been 3 or 3.5, which to I see their point. To a black family, that was a pair of tennis shoes for a kid. And uh, a lot of what I know about my father, I had to get through my mother. She would convey to me sometimes just the kind of the partial and fragments and stuff she didn't want to, because my father wasn't. He Let me kind of describe my dad first, mom for last, because I think although the was it the French or whatever, they would actually eat dessert first and then eat the crudité, the salad at the end. It's hard because a lot of us here in Texas, we've got, you know, some have dinner and supper kind of confused with lunch. They have dinner confused with luncheon or whatever. So anyway, uh, gosh, I don't know where to start with my dad. My dad was, I don't know, this could go a while. I'm trying to. My father was the type. Actually, my dad was like in his older ages. He was kind of like the original Latka Gravis on the TV show uh, Taxi. He'd mostly be like doing, working on the truck or something like that. And then he'd break out with I've learned some of those phrases and stuff like, Yaksi mush, jak tam to Slavensko yellish. My dad would, and then he would like start doing nonsense stuff that I couldn't possibly ever figure out. Mixing Czech, Slovenian, German, other bits and pieces he knew, and just entertaining the kid, the tool pusher. Hand me the 3/4. Yeah. My dad was, you know, during what was, I guess, both prohibition and depression, my father prospered. My dad was, my dad was, had kind of, he was, you know, kind of the tough guys don't dance and they don't run their mouth and shit. They don't sit around with all them gay mafia guys, mafiosi, whooping on and talking about punani and stuff because, as Willie Nelson said in his Brokeback Mountain song, usually them cowboys is always talking about uh, the the cookie end up being gay. Yeah, we know that. Go into every little detail. And actually, during Prohibition, and actually that was before the beginning of the Depression. Actually, as the Depression began, my dad was in good shape. He was working on. They were. That's a long story if I get into it. My dad was a distiller of fine spirits and brewer of beer. without any tax stamps. And he always had a, but he never, I think when he was doing that, he had a tendency to, and because first, like, it, you know, they may not have, a lot of them didn't know that there's some methanol in with the ethanol that's got to be thrown out the first. Bruno's, you have had a busy day. Okay, I got you. I'll read it in a second, Bruno. My buddy. It's good to have real friends that care. And I remember here a while back, I had a little spade of trouble, and suddenly everything was taken care of. $5,000 worth of something was taken care of, and I got out of jail. I had to flush my brother out of hiding. I only had one mechanism, and that was to go on air. My channel, my last channel, and smoke him out. I took a bit of a whooping. I almost died during the arrest. I did. I went into shock. I got a little bit of my dad's okay. I've already gone 6 minutes. I'm barely even, because towards the end there's a lot of silence. I'm trying to set up some of the remarks my mother made, telling me about, and he had fallen and just, please, my mom. He fell in love with my mom when she was 16 years old. She made him wait 4 years. Actually, I'm going to tell the story of how because she wouldn't marry him as long as it was known in the community that just fine spirits and good bottled beer could be found at the house that he built by the time he was 21 of his own money. My dad, my dad dropped out of. I'm not going to go ahead and tell it, but you're not going to get my full mother's maiden name. I think my dad actually fell in love with my mom after they moved from Lee County. I can't say the name of the place because that's one of my passwords somewhere. So look it up. You have trouble. Good luck finding the name of the, and not the way because I used the full name. And they had moved into the Prairiedale community, which community means they're, you know, spread out for a mile. There was a little school. That's where he went to school. And in 1913, my dad was 8 years old because he, like me, he knew how to read, write, and do arithmetic. And he was wise enough to know that the real knowledge that he needed to get his hands on that silver and maybe some gold was out there in the farms and the factories, and may have done some work on the railroad as it came through nearby. And I'm sure he did. He was already had work. I mean, he was a farm kid, you know? And I think it was in that small cabin. Please bear in mind that my Aunt Ellen died of childhood leukemia. My dad's one of 9. One died, so one of 8 that survived childhood. And my mother was one of 8. I'm one of 8. In the Oriental world, that's 3 triple eights is like super. I'm thinking about this because of the Chinese lady the other day, and I've actually seen the base of the cabin that he last lived in, and so what I'm about to tell you will explain why my father had certain opinions about the sellers of Bibles that weren't entirely positive. I'm trying to kind of play it close to the vest way. Actually, my father wouldn't give up nothing, man. He was, my father was kind of one of them snitches, get stitches. Well, no, not really. I mean, he wasn't a gangster type. He didn't go around bullying people or shit. He was just, you know, he knew that there was money in alcohol during the Prohibition. And my mother, just kind of, then this is the story of how my father, who was steadily courting and going over to her family's house. And that was long after her mother had died. I think that's why my mother, because her family had gotten into the habit of not going to church. I told you, we're stealth Jews, Christian front man, Jewish females, stealth Jews. She wanted to be in the congregation on Sunday and stuff like that. And, having watched her mother die and stuff when she was 12, my grandmother died in 1925, I guess, around that range. And, oh God, she was in the late 20s. And my mom was 6 foot tall and playing basketball at the nearby high school. Well, I've already told you one of the names: Prairiedale, Birch Creek. What the hell? This is kind of an intimate bedtime tale. I'm trying to tell you things I've kept secret due to evil people that can watch. But shit, my own bank uses. I have to go through every kind of. They use voice print security, and you're not going to get the phrases on here. You're not going to be able to record my voice. So anyway, and actually, her sisters. I'm talking about the time when my dad proposed. I'm leading up to it. My mom was 16 years old. She was 6 feet tall. She actually briefly, while they were, I think it was already Manuel Feigenbaum was already getting into the dry goods business and was beginning to go to New York and buy clothing and bring it back and sell it. And it's the best of my remember. He was already, some reports say he didn't start till 40. Anyway, for a while there, my mom had to wear her father's overalls and stuff because it's until she my mom used to be able to knock out a dress. She had the time. She could knock out a dress, from fabric and pattern, finish a dress in one afternoon, no problem. If she had the afternoon time for. She was one of them Jewish gals. Hands always busy knitting or something, or cooking, and this is a story of bedtime tale of mom and dad, and maybe the way you ought to be if you're a mom or dad. So, my father did what he had to by the time the Depression hit, I think he had a lot of silver, maybe a few pieces of gold. When the Depression hit, them idiots that had given him all their silver and gold in exchange for spirits, they started hiding that paper money in their beds and stuff. That's what caused the Depression. Was Franklin Delano Roosevelt wasn't smart enough to simply replace the 1/3 of currency that they knew was missing from circulation. He was a dumbass communist. I hate the fact that I'm biologically related to, not from. He was a Jew. Okay, he called himself a Presbyterian, but he's still a Jew. Roosevelt, Rosenfeld, Pinkfield. Having a little knowledge of languages helps you to spot Jews. Of course, they're Jewish names in the UK that y'all don't even really. Y'all think y'all are Irish or Scottish. Horse shit. I'm sorry. Horse apples. So, everything's calming down. The switch is coming up. Daddy's about to get the top floor of the brand new, one of the biggest brick buildings in downtown Caldwell, Texas. The whole top floor was a residence. One of the finest buildings in town. would be for him and his wife. He was scheming on this shit, and he was going to run the power plant, the new power plant. This is before the rural electrification. Ambulance. This was before there was even any talk of the rural electrification of America. My mom wanted to live in town. The rural life was, it's a long story. So one day, my dad was already, by then, she was 16. He was actually 6 years older, so he was 22. Had already built one house. And so he was a big, tall guy, and she was 6 foot. He kind of knew he had the market cornered on the men area, and the Texas women won't marry, wouldn't marry a man shorter than him. Simple as that. So one day he eased up onto her family's back porch. I gotta not say the name to you. And he said, I think he's kind of staring off into space like I am right now. He said, well, Nora. And I turned to look at her and said, looks like I've run off all the boys. I guess you're going to have to marry me now. She just giggled. She loved telling that story. She only told me a couple times. Now, to get on with it, I'd already told you, I've said that my dad was a joke. When my mother and I would be discussing the Bible, I would be comedically, tripping her up with counterpoints. And she'd go, you're just like your daddy. And I was a joker. It wasn't, you're just like your daddy wasn't an insult. It was a compliment. You get it? You're just like your daddy. And actually, she wasn't even in the habit of pointing fingers. That's peanut. That's Freudian, phallic stuff. It might have been more like open-handed, like this. You're just like your daddy. Don't point fingers. Texans don't do that. Really. I'm doing it because I picked up bad habits. Been around too many fucking meth heads for the last few years and shit. Right now, while I was talking that, I was slightly doing a little pill rolling with my left hand. I'm highly self-aware of my behaviors. So, anyway, I remember looking at the picture the day Mom and Dad got married. Wasn't in church. Mom knew she was a Jew. Dad, pretty sure he knew he was a Jew. No. German Jew. And even on the English side, Jewish. So sometimes you don't want to talk about things because you could get your ass killed. But I could just see my mom. Them basketball outfits at that time were almost to the floor, yet they wore, these like bloomers underneath them that you could see that went down to appropriate shoes and stuff, or, tennis type shoes. And I could just see my mom out there maybe that's where she learned her elbowing skills. That purse snatcher, that young black man that was barely her height, she actually just stooped by then. He was 6 foot, and she was getting a slump to about 5'10" from bearing 8 children. Black kid tried to rob her. She was just, trying to get him out, and he accidentally caught the elbow, one of the hardest, sharpest, best places to. Oh, and then she told me the flour bag busted, and he was just covered with flour from head to toe, and the blood was really. Flour was really clinging to it, and he had to walk back into the ghetto from there. She didn't tell it in a malicious way. She was just telling it she was enjoyed as like a 78-year-old woman at that age and stuff, that she just went a couple blocks to the neighborhood store and bought some things, and some punk ass kid tried to rob her, and 78 years old. She pretty much just beat the crap out of him with just her elbow, ladylike, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, And so that's how my dad proposed. My mom, she was smoking. And to one of my viewers who uh, may be into that kind of that dairy farmer type of non-classical beauty, yeah, my mom had it up top, down bottom, tiny waist, naturally curly hair, 6 foot tall. My dad was at least 6'5" or so, and I was his tallest and brightest. I was actually the first child he bought a full set of encyclopedias for. The rest of them kids was too busy, running off to join the army or play football or shit like that. But he knew I could do both. I could work endlessly and, like the perfect workaholic. My parents were workaholics. They're stoic and workaholic, and not like me right now, maybe wasting words that are going to be largely heard by people who haven't even finished forming an opinion of me yet. And still think I'm some kind of bum trying to run down the mighty king of the hobos. It's hilarious. I'm sorry. I'll be a little bit more reserved. So the only time my dad was, because he liked playing around with words, and there was J. Edgar Hoover, which it kind of was through the grapevine that J. Edgar was a little bit strange, and my mom began entertaining because she knew eventually she would satisfy the primary obligation, which is to make sure your children have been fed. We don't take care of her until it's school time. She knew she would eventually get to become what we would call now a Messianic Jew. My mom didn't really care, and I don't care. I'm going to tell you anyway, because actually I approve of their translation. The ones they've got one that's really good. They've had I don't know if I really ever went over the interlineals. I just I've read all the. And my dad liked to kind of play around with the word J. Hoover. As I told you, he was a Latka Gravis type, and jak si máš, jak tam to Slovensko děláš, and all this kind of flashka people, and all this. Although I'm doing it in my voice, not his. They do it calmer and less animated and more stoic. That means cold beer, and I come from a culture that actually drank beer, the famous Shiner beer sold in New York City. They drink it at room temperature and you salt it. It becomes Gatorade, essentially. Anyway, we salt our melons. We're a different culture and yeah, I'm already like 23 minutes, but I'm getting there. I'm trying to do a kind of prefatory remarks so that you understand what little my mother's told me, and some of the mom may be a whole different subject. I'm trying to mostly. You don't drive too good, bro. So, see, I was brought up in a different thing. Is we were taught not to ask prying questions. That's rude as shit. I never asked. I would just sit and wait for mom to volunteer and tell me things, and that's the way loving people do it. When you pry and gnaw and bite and chew on people, that's not loving. Sometimes they don't want to tell you that answer because it hurts their feelings. I know I have very few feelings. I'm a man. I feel hungry. Uh, I feel like getting drunk. I feel like getting high. I feel like getting laid. I feel like dropping a deuce. I feel like getting high again. I feel like getting laid again. It becomes redundant at a certain point with male feelings. There's not really much variety in there. Women have endless feelings. But my mom would bring up things, and when she's telling me this, I'm picturing that small, log cabin. There was wild garlic to keep any kind of rodents and insects out and shit. Still growing there long after it burned down. It was common in those days. And I think it was the last time he got out with just his nightshirt, which goes to the floor, and his brand new pair of shoes. And they had to watch their house burn again because fire in wooden homes and stoves and stuff with wood stoves inside there, because you got two different ones for cooking, the other one's for heating the entire house. Because please bear in mind, you got 10 people sitting at that table. There was probably people sleeping on that table at night, sleeping on pallets on the floor. This is Texas in 1905 to 1913, 14. My dad, dropped out of school after the third grade. He was going like, well, that's enough. I can understand all this shit out here. I need to get the hell to work and make some goddamn money. Hot damn, I need money. I think he was beginning to find that women weren't a bunch of, booger heads, and that some of them was kind of, actually, that's where I'm going to cut in. I left off earlier. Actually, in the last video, I failed to mention that was Noah I was talking about the berries and stuff like that. The Noah's. Me and Bruno didn't really like the movie because there's a lot of inconsistencies. Strength comes from the Lord and stuff. I'm going to probably continue to make errata. That's why I'm actually trying to drown out. But when my father's family moved from Lee County into Burleson County, even closer to the heart of his grandfather's, what came to be a total of 5.5 leagues of plantation. This wasn't all in one. It depends on location where you're doing the planting and stuff, but it was huge. And in those days, one of the forms of entertainment was going to see the new babies. And I bet you my mother was born in 1912, and he would have been, 6 or 7 years old. The family gets in the wagon and goes down and looks at the baby. And that's one of the reasons my mom wanted to live in town, was she was getting tired of rural life. Actually, they had moved to town by the time my dad married her. And she was such a pretty little baby. It's a good love story, really. It's anyway. One day, my mom volunteered. She was talking about that area that I was just describing, and she was telling me a little bits and pieces. She didn't want to badmouth anybody. If she badmouthed somebody, that means you was bad. My mom and dad weren't gossip. My dad didn't gossip at all. Period. Didn't wasn't judgmental about anybody really. Didn't refuse anybody's company. That's why we had to have 3 services in 2 counties. Everybody wanted it. And this is what little I know is my dad never made any profession of faith or anything. Is the only thing I could get out of my mom that she volunteered was, I don't think he had really anything against you, Lord. This is not a prayer, but against the Lord. He didn't like the sellers of Bibles. And I'm thinking about the time I'm going like, yeah, they're, because he would have had that shortcut with actually I did it later for medical reasons. I looked at the old pictures and realized the picture that we have on his headstone is where they'd shave up above the ear. He had a classic kind of Germanic hairstyle, which is actually very healthy in a humid environment. You can do payas, the ringlets, and if you're out in the dry sand shit, that's actually might keep the sand out. You have to kind of interpret God's laws. Anyway, and I was thinking in those days, they'd go around, and they sold family Bibles where you registered all your births and stuff. They were big, they were expensive, they were a money-making item, and part of the sales deal was you invite them in, And then they had began, and of course, dinner. And unfortunately, in a house, a log cabin that small, with a table that big, and a stove and a fireplace and all that other, and you got the pallets stacked up for kids. I could see what was happening was my father, who had been out putting in usually a 16 during summertime, 14, 16-hour day working in somewhere on the railroad or some man's field as a hired hand, hard working. He put me to work swinging a full-size axe when I was 5 years old. And I enjoyed it. I didn't like cutting down the mesquite trees. I used to, some of the trees that were real tall, I'd climb up to them. I'd cut them just enough, climb up to them, and then start rocking them and riding them down like a monkey. Anyway, I had a good childhood. Spent most of the free time I had I wasn't working with my dad, and sometimes I was working. So, but we did it all anyway. That's so much I'd like to tell you about an interesting life. I've been a really good life. But I could kind of picture what she was kind of hinting at was these are guys with long pomaded hair. Oh gosh, I really, because it's kind of in my dad's culture, it's kind of effeminate. And they'd sit there and they'd do their little blathers. They're really mostly out there. They had bought Bibles in bulk. It was an old, Bible selling's an old game. It's a money maker. You play guilt on them. Do you have a current family Bible now? And every now and after the house burns down, you got to buy a new one and try to reconstruct from memory all the birth dates and all the stuff. See where I'm going with this? And my dad would have to probably stand with his back to the wall while those fat, greedy bastards sucked money out of my family and ate what was really food that he paid for. They weren't very Christian. They were blood-sucking Bible salesmen. I'm speaking in my voice, interpreting the pictures that I know to be real. I cannot speak for my father, but I got a feeling what he was thinking. She told me he didn't like Bible salesmen. I've gone almost 33 minutes here now. This bedtime story, unfortunately, doesn't have a happy ending for me. Because I've got to tell you, I've already been through a spinal fracture, a leg reconstruction. Probably one of the most horrible things I had to do was the cops actually knew it. I'm not even going to address my mother much anymore at this point in time. I get to be trying to cover my dad, who was a man of few words. He was a wise man. He kept his mouth shut until he ran into friends or with his children, occasionally with his wife. Let the idiots talk. That's what I learned from my dad. But then I became more like my mom. I really kind of went, as the teachers encouraged it. And I wasn't even going to class my dad died the very day before my first spring game at A&M, Texas A&M, where the Kruger name is all over the place. And it was horrible. He had benzene-induced leukemia from the workplace. Shit, it's just hadn't even gotten to 68 years yet. And they'd brutalized him for a couple of years. But that's why I turned down 5 years at Stanford, was that I knew my senior year that my dad was sick. And I had decisions to make. And one of those decisions were, where the hell do I go to college? And I go, well, I'm going to go to college closest to my father. My father finally went in the hospital for the final time, went into coma. I was the only child that was there every night, all night long. At about, the cops knew it too. They just looked the other way. I think I set the record from the MD Anderson Cancer Area Diagnostic Center down South Houston, out the south side, and up to Texas A&M Kyle Field. One day I did that in slightly under 57 minutes. That's an average speed the whole way of 120 miles an hour, which means I don't know how even that the thing was like magic. It was never got stopped. I'd go in, I'd practice, just barely shower in and out. Boom, I'm so used to and then back at averaging 120 miles an hour. Actually going faster. Actually going 120 miles in less than an hour. No stop signs. It was clear. It was usually at that time of day. It was open. The lights are open. Boom! But it's blowing through. How do you do that for more than a month and no cop ever stops you? Because they know the car, they know the plates, they know the circumstances in all those counties. Because I was a famous person. You know anybody that's ever done that? No. And finally, at the last minute, I got to tell you that my finals about how it's true. Talk to them while they're in a coma. They can still hear. Charlie was making plans. Prof never showed up. Billy Wayne never showed up. None of the sisters ever showed up. Actually, the nurses, when you're terminal, you don't even get an IV. They let you dehydrate. They don't waste any more resources on you because he's already been at it for a couple of years of heavy treatment. The nurses don't come. And they actually left us, because Charlie was there by then, towards the very last couple of days. They had left us a vacuum so we could suck the blood that would be issuing from his stomach and lungs. You getting the picture? And this is the point I want to make before the final of one of the most traumatic moments of my life. This will help maybe purge it a bit. Is my dad could hear in what was going on in the room. My dad they'd like even given him like opium suppositories and all that shit. And he was such a hard ass, he wouldn't, nope, I ain't sticking nothing up my butt. It's when his veins were collapsing, couldn't inject him with, I could go IM, but the point is that my brother Jerry was flying back from Africa where he was drilling wells after, I think he'd gone through the Biafran Revolution in Nigeria in the 60s, and I think he was still there drilling the oil wells for Nigeria. Ungrateful bastards. And I kept telling him, hey, Daddy, Jerry's coming. Because I know Daddy loved Jerry. Jerry was the runt of the family. And he used to call me Runt. Didn't work. He was the only brother that, kind of encouraged he'd bring me cool shit and every chemistry set he could find at yard sales and shit like that. And he was the only brother who ever, and then for the last 30, 40 years, he'd been an asshole to me most of the time. And shit, because he didn't act, but I did act when the oldest brother committed fraud against my mother. Simple as that. I was the one that stood up. In my community, when I stood up to that crooked ass cop, they started calling me the stand-up guy. They loved me. They cut out that newspaper article, the letter I wrote to that bitch ass, didn't know she was a cop. And I kept going, Jerry's just landed at the airport, Dad. He's on the way. Just wait a little bit. He'll be here. And I went, Daddy, Jerry's here. And my brother just walked in with like a bag of goodies, including like a puzzle ring, pure gold puzzle ring from Africa, all sorts of these little things and stuff. That's the way he had a tendency to do. And then my oldest brother did that too. I bring gifts that are really irrelevant to the situation or whatever. It was his way of anyway. And sure as shit, my dad woke up. Actually, Charlie wasn't in the room at the moment. He may said he was there for the final breath though with me. As he gave me that credit for having the balls to go through that. And briefly, my dad woke up and made eye contact with Jerry and me and stuff, and then he went back into a coma. A little bit later, this is how I weed out those fake Vietnam vets. As I go, "What unit are you with, son?" And, not sure about you. Tell me what the death rattle sounds like. And you ought to hear me when I snort. My dad did the death rattle for 4 hours. I am, inside my head, I have the heart of a teenager, but I swear sometimes I feel like Methuselah, that 4 hours alone. I don't want to remember that sound. I'll know it again when I hear it. But in my memory, that sound is gone. I can remember all these songs and all the notes and shit, but that sound I cannot mimic, don't want to mimic. And then the blood started gushing up. That nurses knew it was going to happen. Charlie had come back in at the last moment, and he and I were taking care of the blood so he could get his final breaths. And 2:10 a.m. on April 20th, 1973, my father took his last breath. And really, finest man I've ever known. I remember him working when he had 2/3 of his gut was just working day and night for doing the right thing. I'm sorry, there's some condensate coming off the roof and dripping. Anyway, yes, I have full-blown worst case PTSD from 1,000 incidents that bad, or as bad as the leg reconstruction and all the other stuff I've seen that I don't really remember too well. Properly functioning brain screens them out. I hope I did not end this bedtime story abysmally. It's a story about life and death. It's a story of a good man and a good woman. The kind of man and woman you should be if you're a mom and a dad. This is the bedtime story about a good, truly good mom and dad. So, sleep well, my children. Be a good mother and a father. And they need both. They really do. You know, things don't always go as we planned. Do your best. My best to you and yours. And nighty night. Betty bye.